And we are live. Welcome to another episode of Business Focus Live with me, John, where we talk about business related topics as well as news from here and around the world. If you're new to this channel, don't forget to subscribe and let's get started. And we're back. Thank you again for joining me today. In this week's episode, there's a lot of things, a lot of interesting things that's been happening this past week or so. So without further ado, let's go to the different topics that we'll be covering this week. So first is we'll be talking about EA, the gaming giant, publishers of many popular sporting games from FIFA and what like. Not that I'm a big fan of what they're doing, but what's interesting here is the franchise that they have to pay to be able to showcase the different players in the soccer world with regards to with the likes of Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Messi, and whatnot. They have to have permission from the organizer, which is FIFA here. And what's interesting here, their partnership has come to a close. The question here is, will they continue their partnership? Obviously, it makes EA a lot of money in terms of just how popular the sport of soccer is. FIFA is asking for a hefty fee. So will they cave in or not? So we'll talk about that. Sticking along the same lines of sports, on the realm of hockey, if you're familiar, I'm not a big fan, but what's interesting here is a lot of sports are getting a lot of a big cut in terms of revenue. Having partnerships with the likes of ESPN here would generate the league as much as $1 billion. So how did that happen, and how does that compare to the other popular sporting leagues in the United States? Next, we'll be talking about the even though business have resumed, problems persist with regards to the supply chain for many companies here, especially with the globalization of many corporations or companies. They rely in the synchronicity of the company's supply chain here from one region to another to get the supplies needed to produce the product and sell it to their end consumer here. But that's not the case here. So it's not as if companies or manufacturers have tried to ramp up their production to meet the demand, but there are other issues here. So we'll discuss that as well. Next is, here's an interesting part with regards to the real estate in China here. One would think that obviously with the boom in the economy, people would invest more in more real estate so that the growth and expansion of a country, in this case, in their economy, would meet the demands. And what's interesting here, I think they overestimated their growth, and it has created, they call it a ghost town, so to speak. So we'll take a look at that as well. Next, we'll be talking about uh, ransomware attacks for many businesses, especially the sudden shifting or the necessity for many businesses to shift their businesses to with an online component, and with the sudden shift of many businesses, the rise of attacks, or in this case ransomware, to name a few, the different strategies that hackers penetrate companies has risen as well. How are they able to do that? We'll discuss that in a bit. And lastly, we'll be talking about an interesting product that Microsoft has recently, it's going to launch, or yeah, going to launch later this year, an Xbox Series X, but it's not the console that you think. So let's get started here. So for our first story here, we were talking about EA's partnership for the longest time, for I think for almost more than a decade here, or almost 2 decades, that the partnership. So EA licenses, or bought the licenses. No, not necessarily bought, but rented the license from FIFA so they can be able to use the likeness, the names of the players that play soccer under FIFA. Obviously, it has generated millions or billions of dollars for the company, and don't get me started with the microtransactions with the FIFA Team Ultimate card thinking that it's not a way of it's not a way of gambling to entice kids, and kids is the target here, to spend actual money here. What's interesting here, EA's reliance on one of the most best-selling games of all time, and keep on churning out year after year with little to no improvements on the actual games per se. So they are reliant on the permission that FIFA is allowing the use of of the sport. Well, that now has come to a close in a sense, because obviously if FIFA knows the money it generates for EA, obviously it creates more brand awareness for FIFA, and they keep on charging after renewal for, I think, every 4 years or so. And now it's a staggering amount from what they were asking before. So as much as $1 billion, which obviously, if your brand is recognizable as FIFA and a lot of people are interested to playing or wannabe soccer players. Actually, I've owned I think the last decade's version of FIFA, and that's the last time I bought it and played it. But anyway, but the point here is they're now at an impasse. So who will win here? Is it FIFA? Where will they lower their price or look for a different partner, or will EA cave in? Because obviously, if EA suddenly to lose the rights for FIFA, other companies or publishers can swoop in and take over the mantle here. And the partnership have started way back in 1993, all the way to the present here. And yeah, that's right. So their partnership, the license they're able to use, so they have to renew it every 4 years here. So obviously, FIFA knowing the popularity of the sport, they can keep on increasing the price, and obviously EA has to pay, and that's why they're trying to milk every centavo that they can get from not just selling the games, but selling microtransactions and incorporating the undesirable FIFA Team Ultimate card to generate even more profit here. Now, what's interesting here is not only is the fee going to double or increase to 1 billion, the group FIFA is also limiting the exclusivity to specifically to just the soccer game itself. So EA cannot just use it to, I don't know, maybe sell merchandise or other forms of entertainment, or they could leverage the brand FIFA here. And obviously, the FIFA brand is a big deal, and it's a big source of revenue. And if EA were to suddenly lose that particular franchise, it's going to hurt their bottom line, and it's not going to bode well. And for those who are familiar in the game, the one main competitor that they have is Konami's PES, or PES, Pro Evolution Soccer, which I haven't played, but I've seen it's comparable. But the difference there is then they don't have to pay a licensing fee to FIFA here, which is somewhat circumventing the process here, so which they're allowed to do. So question here is, obviously, if you're FIFA, you want to leverage your brand notoriety, but if you're EA, you'll be concerned here, because if you don't pay up, a lot of big revenues will be lost here. And I don't think if you're a shareholder, you would allow this to happen, and can impact the bottom line for the business, which is EA. Now obviously they have other major titles under their belt. You have Star Wars, which is not doing too well, and that's why I think Disney is finding a different partner together. So question is, would EA cave in here? So we'll we'll find out sooner or later, but I think more or less for EA's sake, they would cave in. Otherwise, obviously, another company or publisher would take the mantle and continue with the franchise and makes tons of money here. Anyway, next we have here, sticking with sports still, actual sports now, not games, but the National Hockey League, or NHL. So if you're into hockey, good news for the league, because according to CNBC.com, NHL has reached a deal with ESPN to promote, to showcase the hockey sports in their channel, as well as TNT also. I forgot that one. So obviously 1 billion may seem a pretty significant amount to partner with. Obviously, if there's more viewers, uh, more sponsorship in the case of ESPN and Turner, so the league could benefit from it in terms of teams earning more money. Players could demand for higher salary here, which benefits everyone here at the end of the day, which is great. But it pales in comparison to the other popular leagues. You have the NBA, the National Basketball Association, which I think recently inked, how many billion was it? I think it's 10 billion. Could be wrong. Obviously, it's significantly higher. Then you have one of the biggest sports in the United States is the NFL, or the National Football League, which recently partnered with several big TV networks from NBC, ABC, ESPN. I'm forgetting another company, but they're willing to pay as much as a little over 100 billion for 10 years of partnership. So to showcase that game. So it just goes to show you, if a sport or any sport is that popular, a lot of people are watching, then advertisers would be interested to partner with. That's why TV networks are willing to shell out a lot of money. And obviously, at the end of the day, you create better product, a lot of eyeballs, a lot of advertisements. So everybody here has a win-win scenario here. Anyway, let's take a closer look here. So the partnership, as mentioned, so the 1 billion media rights package for ESPN as well as Turner Sports here. Actually, I tend to follow more on Turner Sports here, or TNT, with the big host, from Shaquille to Kenny Smith to Charles Barkley. EJ is another one. Ernie Johnson, sorry, not Ernie Smith. I like their banter during the discussion, whether it's basketball or any other sports here. But anyway, so the opportunity here is obviously to boost the popularity here. And what's interesting here, on average, an NHL game typically earns less than a million viewers. So obviously, having more viewers is always desirable, and if they're able to partner with companies like TNT and ESPN, just goes to show the popularity of hockey is growing still, even though it's not at the same level as the other American sports. But obviously, you have your Northern American neighbor, Canada, who for most of the year, plays a lot of hockey here. Anyway, what's interesting that partnering with the new company means ending an existing relationship, which they did with NBC for more than 16 years. So maybe NBC doesn't want to pay up, similar to how EA we talked about earlier is not willing to pay that exorbitant sum, or maybe they're not getting the desired result here. So obviously, if another company or another network is willing to pay for that amount, then good for them. If money is not an issue, as long as the economics is there. Anyway, so TNT is already rolling out a double-header national package, which includes some crossover appeal. So which going to feature famous NBA commentator Charles Barkley, known for his very upfront commentary. He doesn't shy away from, if he has to blunt with hot issues as recent as with the Kyrie Irving vaccination issue, and then you have the Ben Simmons issue in the NBA. So you can check it out in the YouTube. There's a lot of videos showcasing his, I won't say he's trying to strike up controversy, but he's just trying to be upfront with his opinion here. Anyway, obviously, if companies like ESPN and Turner Sports are willing to pay a handsome fee, it just goes to show here that advertising sees a big opportunity here. And the article goes on to break down which categories or industries are top products to endorse in those segments. So you have automotive category that leads by spending 15%, a little over 15% of ad spending. And then you also have restaurants that make up almost 13%. So obviously, so many of the people who's watching are car nuts in a sense, or owners. Sorry. And then you have restaurants. Obviously, people enjoy eating. Obviously, you want to encourage people to go out. And if in your region people are allowed to eat out, dine out, with a group of people. Obviously, they want to capitalize on that. Then you also have insurance that invest 12%, almost 12% of ad spending. So obviously in different categories here. What's interesting here is Apple commercial has been the leading search engagement in the sport here. So kudos for them. Actually, I haven't seen an actual game live on TV for several years. I only get to watch the highlights in YouTube. So we'll see if the popularity will keep on growing here uh, in the future. Anyway, continuing, we were talking about, yeah, supply chains for many businesses, right? Especially if you're Apple, Samsung, you rely on many supply chain companies or processes to supplement the needs of your product, production of your product, right? And according to this article here at businessinsider.com, there are 4 key indicators of how bad the supply chain crisis is. And obviously, how you see is impacted in the actual retail stores, wherein you see empty shelves here. And obviously, the last time we encountered that is during the lockdown from last year, when tissue papers were running out, or in our case, not just tissue paper, but also bread, which is a food staple here in our country. So you only see the end result, but we don't see the rationale as to why is it that there are, where stockouts are common, or yeah, common in many retail stores. Is it because of not enough production here? We'll take a closer look here. Okay. So as mentioned here, empty shelves can be, a big issue for shoppers. Obviously, if you rely for retail stores or supermarkets, or even big or small, to provide the basic necessities of your of an individual, of your family. So you need to access the basic needs and wants of a family here. Now, obviously, as the pandemic has progressed, and we're now here a year later, global supply chains are significantly hampered, as mentioned. Now, obviously, they're trying to get back to some normalcy, not more so than others. So the question here is, how does it affect the entire supply chain, from the manufacturing side, from raw materials, all the way to getting to the consumer's hands here? So obviously, consumers are seeing shortages. Okay, so from raw material shortages, you have production delays. Obviously, if people are sick, or people are not willing to go back to, to risk their health, it's another disruption that you have to contend with. Other issues are slower and even sometimes interruption in the port operation. And I think this is the major bottleneck that you would encounter here. Obviously, having limited resources and manpower could hamper the smooth operations of even before the pre-pandemic here. So you can just imagine the rise of labor cost, rise of equipment is on overdrive here. And imagine uh, ships are waiting on queue. So if it even if it arrives in your port of country or origin to your port of destination, you could just imagine the delay here. And I think there was mentioned here that the delay could backlog as much as 80 ships here, so which is pretty significant here if you think about it. And the backlog is, it's not just felt in some countries like in the United States, but also in other regions. And with the upcoming holiday, obviously they're trying to ramp up production, but the problem is, how do you get those products from other countries all the way to a different country, and then being able to redistribute it within the particular country here? And obviously, this is not an easy thing. And just an example here in the coast of California, to give you an example, along long Los Angeles and Long Beach, having to have 80 ships lined up just to be unloaded. So you can just imagine the delays that it would take to be able to unload those containers. I think, how many containers do they have per ship? Hundreds, or not thousands, I'm not sure. But it will take a lot of time. And if you have limited people manning the cranes that would transfer those containers, and you need truckers to be able to deliver it from the port to the different states in the United States or even in other countries. So the cost will pile up. That's why if you're able to see items, some are being charged at a more higher rate than what it used to be here. And obviously the domestic trucking rates will be significantly affected here, as the example mentioned here. Or was it the cost of hauling a truckload for toilet paper from one state to another would be dramatically significantly higher. So you could just imagine the cost of delivering it would be passed on to the consumers, and you have no choice here. Otherwise, you won't have the products here. How long before it stabilizes? Who knows? I mean, some saying it could take maybe later this year. Some are saying maybe next year or even later that. So it's pretty concerning. So the labor shortage is pretty much felt here, and how much it matches up to the goods that needs to be moving or the needs moving is another problem. And obviously if you're a retail or if you own a retail store, the issue is inventory management. So the inventory to sales ratio has to be monitored here, because you don't want to run out of stocks or have stockouts, because that's another opportunity cost there if that were to arise. So do you order more? And the concern is, if you were to hold more products, then that would in turn increase your storage cost or holding cost here. So it's a difficult balancing act for decision makers, especially from the manufacturer to the distributor all the way to the retailers here. And it's not just them. Even restaurants there are significantly affected because of this, because of the sudden decrease or increase of demand for goods would hamper the or affect the supply chains here. And obviously the based on current trend, the normalcy that we're looking for pre-pandemic, we're still a long ways from that part here. So question is, what do you do here? Obviously, being able to forecast demand and patterns in the future. Will there be any more interruptions, or should companies like, I think we discussed last time, Hyundai is looking to even consolidate their production because of the chip shortage in the car manufacturing. They're looking to invest in the chip manufacturing so that they don't have to rely as much as to other companies here or other chip manufacturer. Anyway, next we have here an interesting topic. So you have China with the growth of their economy, obviously the improvement of many citizens' life, and investing in a lot of businesses. And one of their main investments is investing in the real estate here. And what's interesting, according to businessinsider.com, China has at least 65 million empty homes, enough homes to populate the country of France, and it offers a glimpse into the country's massive housing market problem here. So how did that arrive here? Now, one would think that investing in real estate would be a safe bet here, but I think there's a mismatch of the supply and demand here. And what brought this about? Let's take a closer look. What's interesting here, that 1/5 of the homes in China are empty. So they're calling it the ghost cities here. Now I don't know if you've seen reports here in 60 Minutes or in YouTube documentaries here. So if you were to go outside, just an hour or two, either from Shanghai or even in Beijing, you'll see, looks like a city, but it's basically empty. There's no people living in it. And how did that came about? Well, ghost towns came about because of assumption of sudden influx of people migrating from rural to urban areas here. And this goes back as early in 2000s, or early 2000s, yeah, right at the millennium. Anyway, so they were expecting millions of people migrating from rural to urban areas, and they overestimated the demand here. So from as high as 1 million people to only just a tenth of that. That's 100,000 people who actually who lived in it in reality. So what happened here is people kept on investing on it, thinking that people would live on it. And what happened here? No one leaving it or renting it or even using it. So they're just there. I mean, I wouldn't say they're already breaking down in a sense, but it's still, a finished product, but no one's using it. That's the concerning part. And what's interesting here, the unoccupied units constitute a significant portions of China's enormous housing market. Imagine if that were to suddenly burst. You could just imagine how it will affect the economy in China. And compare that to the United States, it's twice as big. And you can just imagine it's worth in the sum of $52 trillion here. That's back in 2019. So you can just imagine the value it's being valued now at present day. So question is, what led up to this situation here? So obviously, buildings, investing on buildings or real estate is always a good safe bet if people are actually using it. And typically, when they assume that people would migrate, so obviously it would create a new city economy. I won't say economy. So the issue here is there's the mismatch of the supply and demand for real estate. Since Sun, a senior lecturer in Chinese and East Asian business at King's College London, goes on to say, these homes being empty means that they are sold out to investors and buyers, but not occupied by either the owners or renters. So no one's using it, so it would depreciate nonetheless. That's why it looks weird. It's kind of, I don't know what will happen to this one if things were to proliferate and continue in the next few years or decades. I mean, will the bubble burst eventually, which is kind of concerning? But what's interesting here is the government gets big sales from those revenue from leasing out land, and obviously from developers developing it so that they could sell it and generate revenue. Now, this gives the government a very strong incentive to encourage development rather than limiting it, especially if you have limited space here. You want to manage so that the cost of property will be at a manageable space or pace compared that, let's say, in Hong Kong or even in Singapore, where land is at a premiums. Obviously, if you build property on it, it's going to be at a premium price and you have to pay a hefty fee. Now, creating this has created a lot of unintended consequences, so to speak, and problems here. And obviously, the government promoting development, driving up more and more supplies. But if there's no demand, then there's a big gap there. That's what's happening right now. And obviously, it's not a perfect system, and there are flaws with regard to their urbanization strategy here. And obviously, it's causing more problem than necessary. And question is, what would happen with this in the future? What if no one were to actually utilize those investments? Then if it depreciates or become no value at a certain point, so what happens then? Obviously, the companies, those who develop it, are in debt. And then how would it reflect in the balance sheet here in those companies here? So it would be interesting to see how it pans out here. And obviously, according to Mr. Is it Gan? Mr. Gan or Miss Gan? I'm not sure. Anyway, he mentions that part of the problem is that China's overestimation of its urbanization, which is, yeah, kind of makes sense. And how many people would actually move from rural to urban now? Obviously, that makes sense for majority, but not all are willing. Especially in China, there's even a lot more people living in rural areas than in cities here. Anyway, next we have companies who have shifted their strategies, investing in online platforms or offering online services to reach their consumers here. Obviously, there's a double-edged sword. Make it more convenient for consumers, but makes it more easier for hackers or outsiders or nefarious groups to penetrate your businesses here. And according to CNET.com, they mentioned that ransomware rises as a national security threat as bigger threats fall. And obviously, you see a lot of big companies here, Microsoft, to name one, and other multinational companies who have been attacked obviously to generate revenue to ransom your data, either to lock or to use social engineering or use viruses or malicious malware, uh, which is ransomware is another part of that criteria, to generate revenue, obviously to hold your data hostage. And obviously if you cannot operate as a business, then it would affect your revenue in the long run. And rather than get held hostage, they would simply pay out. That's why it's called ransomware. Now obviously it's getting more sophisticated, more elaborate, so to speak, and to the point that calling those cyber criminals is, I think, appropriate, by freezing your computer systems, not just major corporations but also school districts. You also have universities, even public offices, from police stations to hospitals, you name it. Obviously any company that has internet access to their platform can be penetrated if not protected here. That's why a lot of big businesses are having to invest a lot of money, time, and effort to protect their interests here, whether it's data or information and so forth, from external threats. But obviously, it's more complicated than that one, right? Even the government, the White House has spoken regarding this issue, that has risen to that level that even governments has to take notice that whether you're a developed country or a developing country, obviously hackers do not simply pick and choose which nation to attack, but obviously they're looking for which is the easiest target here, if you're vulnerable or not. And what's interesting here is, even according to the Department of Treasury in the United States, suspected ransomware payments reported by banks or other financial institutions have totaled to already to almost 600 million. So it's a big enough industry if you think about it, considering that's just for the first six months of this year alone. So you can just imagine the years past, how much money company has been bleeding because of this incident here. Now obviously many were apprehensive that, does this really occur? Even individuals like we do, obviously, with the using technology, smartphones, laptops, or even desktops, where we access internet on a daily basis, can be easily penetrated. Now obviously it doesn't make sense for them to penetrate individuals, because not many can have the vast resources of big corporations here. And what's interesting here, the major attacks here are being paid, or the ransom are being paid in Bitcoin, which is another problem altogether. Now obviously cryptocurrency is a very popular payment model now, or investment for some, so that because of using blockchain technology, it's not easily traced. And you know through this ransomware, using Bitcoin or using other cryptocurrency as payment, can leave no trace here, which is difficult to follow. And the attacks can wreak havoc even for a small period of time, and obviously can impact many businesses, as much as, let's say, if you're in the gasoline industry, could drive up prices. Or if you're selling commodities like meat, obviously losing control of your, let's say, supply chain or customer profiles, you name it, can be detrimental to the business, not just in the short term but in the long term here. And obviously the malware or malicious software have become more sophisticated. It's not just the virus that they use. Sometimes you don't even know it. It's lying dormant until such a time, when the hackers or those parties deem it necessary, looking at your information where they could steal and so forth. So they would normally look for companies' financial records, obviously to look for monetary rewards, and then hold it hostage so that they could be paid in millions of dollars. And what's interesting nowadays, one would think that only large corporations are being targeted here. No, no, no. It's also small businesses here, because small businesses are even more vulnerable because of less resources to be able to protect themselves. And even some don't even consider their small scale business could be affected, because why would they target small fish? Because there are bigger fishes to fry here. And obviously, the limitations for many businesses, in particular for small businesses, is the cost consideration. One would think that when you start your business, you don't go considering, should I, invest on my security here or cybersecurity protection here? And I think that's the big problem here. And even the Treasury Department goes on to say that what they're planning to do is sanction those cryptocurrency exchanges by holding insurance companies and even financial institutions that facilitate those payments would be held liable here. Now, whether they could, would it make a difference here in the long run here? It would be difficult because obviously you need to get those personal information, but it gets kind of complicated if you look at it. But at the end of the day, the main vulnerability here is the individuals who are using those devices, and no amount of technology that you use can fully protect your business, your info from other people's accessing it, because if you're not careful, right? Like typical is the user password here, right? Typical is one would use an easy password to use, but obviously if you did that and the others know that, they could easily crack your password and gain access to your personal info, which I don't do. Okay, but the problem is that everyone is aware of that issue here. It's kind of interesting, so let's see what happens there. So I'll keep everyone updated. Anyway, next we have here, finally, when you talk of the Xbox Series X, you're thinking of the console here, right? But what's interesting here, as a marketing promotion, Xbox or Microsoft, the company, is offering something else. So according to TechCrunch.com, you can now order the Xbox Series X mini fridge later this month. Oh, I think they're already offering it. Question is, will you be able to access it in your own region? So let's take a closer look. So what's interesting here is they'll be shipping the first ever Xbox Series X mini fridge. Take note, it actually looks like an actual console here on the exterior here. Anyway, and it's a fridge, obviously, and it's going to cost you roughly around $100 or 5,000 bucks if you live in the Philippines here. So what's interesting here is, owning this, how did it start here, which is kind of interesting here. Who would want a console that is also a fridge here, or a fridge in a console here? I guess it's a marketing ploy here. Obviously, there were mentions, I think. Is it mentions? Let me see here. Let's see here. There was a Twitter feed here. Or was it? Let's see. Let's see the Twitter feed here. Yes, yeah. So they mentioned here, I guess people were craving for it, and obviously, if if your Microsoft, if people are willing to buy for your product, why not offer it? Now, how this came to fruition was kind of interesting. So Microsoft obviously did not develop this. They worked with a company, a manufacturing merchandise company named Uconich. Uconic. I don't know how to name it. But anyway, so they offered this product. It has LEDs and the design that actually match the Microsoft Xbox Series X. So if you were to look closely, it looks pretty similar, the design and the aesthetics externally. But once you open it, obviously it's a fridge, so you can put drinks inside there. The mini fridge will be available in the United States, so you can purchase it via Target. In Europe, you can buy it in UK. You can buy it for £90. You can also buy it in France, Germany, Italy, Ireland, Spain, Netherlands, and Poland, all in Europe. Sad to say, there's no mention in the Asia market here. But Microsoft is planning to bring the Xbox mini fridge to more markets next year. So I think it would depend on the demand here. So if there's a bigger demand here in the country, you might see it sooner. Hopefully, we would see first the Steam Deck rather than the mini fridge here. Anyway. Anyway, I think that concludes another episode of our discussion here. Thank you again for watching. For more business news, stay here with Business Focus Live. Or you can check out my other segments. You can watch business updates. That's every Wednesdays. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. You can also leave your comments down below if you have any questions regarding today's topic. I've also leave the link in the description below if you want to check out the full article here. Anyway, as always, I'll see you in the next one. Same time-ish, but same channel always. Uh, that's it. Take care.